Good afternoon and welcome to our 3 o'clock session. My name is Dr. Monique Chisholm and I am the Undersecretary for Education here at the Smithsonian. For those of you who have had the opportunity to attend some of the previous sessions, I hope that you have been enjoying the content and that you are finding some useful resources. I certainly have been really engaged by the conversations and thank all of the presenters. This afternoon, I have the great honor to introduce two fabulous people. I will also help moderate today's session. So without further ado, let me begin introductions. First, I would like to introduce Secretary Lonnie G. Bunch III. He is the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian. He assumed his position on June 16th, 2019. As Secretary, he oversees 21 museums, 21 libraries, the National Zoo, and numerous research centers. He also was the founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, and is the first historian to be secretary of the institution. I am also extremely honored to introduce the 2021 National Teacher of the Year, Juliana Urtubey. Juliana is spending this year advocating for a joyous and just education for all students and celebrates their families, identities, and communities. Juliana is a nationally board certified teacher, and she is known as Miss Earth for her efforts to beautify schools and unify communities. She is a special education teacher at Kermit Booker Elementary in Las Vegas, Nevada. So please join me in welcoming both of them. Thank you and welcome.
So pleased to be with you.
Hello, so happy to be here.
Well, thank you both. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question. And I want you to tell me a little bit about what inspired you to pursue your career path. And Secretary Bunch, I'm going to start with you.
Well, first, let me say how honored I am to be here with Juliana. This is a person I admire, a gifted teacher, someone who in many ways is working in creative ways to make our world better. So I'm just honored to be with you. So thank you for inviting me. So you want to know about what inspired me? It's really two things. One, when I was younger, I couldn't read, and my grandfather would read to me. And once he was reading a book about, it had a picture of school children. And they were probably, taken 100 years before I was around. And as he's reading it, he looked at the picture and he said, "Oh, it just says unidentified children." And then he said, "Isn't it a shame that people could live their lives, die, and nobody knows anything about them?" And I was struck by that. How could that be? And so I became fascinated, first by looking at historic photography, but I became fascinated with saying, I wanted to find a way to make those that are invisible more visible and to give voice to those that are silent. So that started me on my path. But candidly, growing up in a town where there were very few African Americans, there were people who treated me horribly and people who treated me well. And I wondered if I understood history, first of my town, then of the nation, maybe I could understand a little bit about how race matters. And so for me, what inspired me was really trying to figure out how I could help make a country better.
That's amazing and beautiful to make the invisible visible and the unseen seen. That's really, really amazing. Juliana, how about you? To be a teacher means that you choose to do this every year. So what inspired you or who inspired you to become a teacher?
Thank you, Dr. Chisholm and Secretary Bunch. The honor is mine. The reason I love being a teacher is because learning is lifelong. If we believe that learning only happens from 8 to 3, Monday through Friday, then we're missing out on a whole world of possibility. I wanted to be a teacher because I wanted my students to feel the way I felt when I was recently at the American History Museum and I saw this paper mache statue that was built by the Coalition of Immokalee Farm Workers in protest of fair food, and having connections to that organization. When I stumbled upon that piece and I saw that piece, I felt like my history mattered. I felt like I mattered as a person. And I want my students every day in the classroom to feel that same way. As soon as they walk in, they see things that are beautiful, that speak to who they are, that connect them to their family and their community, and that start to right the wrongs that they've experienced, not just in public education, but in general in different spheres of the world. I wanted to be a ray of sunshine, which I have a plethora of. So I wanted to share that. And I also wanted to help my students maintain their culture and their identities and their linguistic gifts.
So both of you really touched on the transformative nature of education, which is a reason why I also became an educator and an education professional. You know, Juliana, people are probably wondering, how do you become the National Teacher of the Year and what does that mean? And I want to also remind people before you answer that question that we will have a Q&A time period at the end of this session. So if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the question box. But Juliana, what does it mean to be National Teacher of the Year?
It means I wake up every day pinching myself, feeling so incredibly proud and lucky to do this work. I get to amplify the brilliance of this country's teachers. We have some of the most amazing people working to educate our children. And so this next year, I get to spend on almost a speaking tour where I get to talk about what I believe will help amplify and improve learning outcomes for all children, which is a joyous and just education. And for me, really what that means is that everybody has a sense of belonging, and two, that we're working really hard to right the wrongs that lead to different outcomes for different children. You become a National Teacher of the Year through a lot of support, a lot of community that lift you up. The logistical process is first you're State Teacher of the Year, and I was so lucky to be the Nevada State Teacher of the Year. And then we all submit an application for National Teacher of the Year. It's a large panel that selects, and you go through a keynote and interview, and then that's how we're selected. And it's just incredible. It's such pride for my family, for my community, and I'm really excited about it still. It's been months and I'm still super excited.
Well, we're all excited for you too. And what a great representative that we have for that message and for teachers. Secretary Bunch, I'm going to switch to you. As the world's largest museum and education and research complex, I would think that the Smithsonian has some responsibility in supporting pre-K through 12 education. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see that responsibility for the Smithsonian?
Well, in many ways, I see the responsibility of being able to support teachers like Juliana. I am the son of two teachers, which means that every day growing up, I saw the extra work they put in. I saw how much they loved working with children, but I saw the frustrations. Sometimes a lack of support, lack of understanding the difference between an administrative view and a teacher's view. And so what I realized is that education is so fundamental for everyone. And I realized that I was lucky having two teachers as parents, but having this sort of real push to sort of educate yourself as far as you can go. And I realized that I was lucky, that there were programs that supported me, there were grants that got me into graduate school, and many of those are closing. And so I wanted to make sure that the Smithsonian helped keep the window of possibility open. And so I felt that the Smithsonian had amazing wonders, expertise, collections, um, a, a, amazing sort of educational thinking and materials. And I felt that in some ways the Smithsonian should not hide its light under a bushel basket, that it should really think, how do we help gifted teachers? How do we help all people who want to educate children? How can the Smithsonian be in every home and in every classroom? And so, in a way, what my goal was is to say that we have a commitment that means we have to get outside of Washington. We have to use things like the Learning Lab and really think about how do we find the right opportunities to engage students, but to also help teachers. I remember many times looking at my parents and saying, what kept them going? What rejuvenated them? Well, maybe the Smithsonian can partly do that to keep teachers sort of motivated and give them that mid-career boost, if you will. And so what I really wanted was the Smithsonian to think about how do we do more than what we've traditionally done? How do we develop real partnerships and collaborations like with the District of Columbia Public Schools? Or how do we make sure that teachers everywhere reap the benefit of what the Smithsonian can do? And candidly, then the Smithsonian reaps the benefit of what teachers do. That in essence, the notion that the Smithsonian has broad enough shoulders to do everything is wrong. But yet, what we can do is by working with gifted teachers, by letting teachers take what we have and taking it in directions we couldn't imagine, we can contribute to what I think is the most important thing in this country, and that is to provide equitable educational opportunities for all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I really like how you position the Smithsonian providing support and resources, but also us learning with and from teachers. And then being in this kind of continuous improvement space where we are growing together to meet needs of students across the nation. You know,
Because in
one
a
of
way,
the,
though, isn't Monique, isn't that really what education is, right? It's a
yes,
marriage of what a teacher brings, what students are interested in, and that marriage really makes everybody better. And that's
it
what
really
I'm
does.
looking for here about how we are able to help teachers and help students and also make the Smithsonian more effective by these kinds of collaborations.
That's absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I heard in the last session where they were talking about, you know, it's we can't sugarcoat that the last 19 months have been extremely difficult for everyone across the nation. And we have seen unprecedented death. And I know Secretary Bunch, you were at an event earlier today that was commemorating that the COVID-19 loss. But one of the things that we also know is that um, through these platforms that we have an opportunity to change the narrative or influence the narrative, and also talk about how to celebrate and support teachers in a new and different way. And Juliana, as a special education teacher, you know, special education teachers, in my mind, have a lot of the great pedagogy and experience that we want all teachers to have, you know, through reaching students. But tell me a little bit about what you want people to know about how best to support and empower special education teachers and students across the nation.
Thank you for that question. Yes, so much of what Secretary Bunch is saying is so important to teachers. Teachers are right now in a place where we are ready to really leverage our voice, to use that expertise to build bridges to the community, to see schools and education as something that is more holistic. And we are in incredible times. And so that means that teachers have to keep up with this. And the best way we can do it is by having a plethora of wealth of resources that not only humanize our students and their experiences, but teach them that they are valuable. You know, I'm wearing my Mr. Rogers gear today that was from the Smithsonian exhibition because he is such a valuable educator in our country, right? His message was that every single person in your neighborhood matters. And I think that that's my job as a special education teacher, to show my students, hey, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. We're going to do better to be able to learn how you learn and teach you that way. And so that's what I like people to know about students with special needs, learning and thinking differences, teachers who serve those students, is that inclusion has to happen, but it has to happen in a holistic design where we ensure that our students are going to thrive. And the best way to support teachers is by developing relationships with us, you know. So I'm proud to be a fellow for different organizations, and I love how they leverage teacher voice. We get to talk about policy and the implication of that policy. We get to test run curriculums and materials and things like that, and we get to give that voice. So including teachers is about developing that relationship that goes back and forth, right? And that's what we do with our students is we propose an idea or we ask an essential question, and then we invite them to have discourse with their peers, discourse with other teachers, their families, their community about these essential questions. And so to be a teacher is just to see the possibility of all those connections.
That's really powerful. So we're starting to get some questions coming in through the question and answer. So I'll just remind everyone that you can go ahead and submit questions. And our audience is ready to jump into some difficult topics. So I hope you're both ready. So one of the questions that has come forth is that, there's a lot of conversation going on right now with regards to critical race theory. And one of the things that we know, well, I read recently in Education Week that there's about 26 states across the nation who have either adopted or are planning to adopt some type of legislation that would prohibit the teaching of race, racism, gender, or sex in their classroom in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. So the question is, how do you consider and address the current discussion in bills regarding critical race theory and how that impacts the work that we're here to do? Secretary Bunch, would you like to start?
Well, candidly, most people who criticize critical race theory don't know what it is. And so for me, it's less about a debate around a critical race theory and more about helping a country recognize there is nothing wrong with facing your history. And that by exploring a history that is ripe with triumph, but also clear in terms of where the country hasn't lived up to its stated ideals, isn't about making anybody feel bad. What it is saying that to be educated is to understand the wholeness, to understand the full possibility of a nation. And honestly, for a historian of America like me, I am really taken that the country has evolved over a period of time. But some of that is because people confronted what was wrong. People shone the light on the darkest corners. So for me, critical race theory is really is a bugaboo in a way that that really is used to say we can't explore our own past. And I have to be honest, a country that's afraid to understand itself is ultimately a country that's not going to fulfill all of its promises. And I think part of the challenge is what are the ways we teach history that isn't explicitly saying, well, we're really teaching about, how this group sacrificed or treated this other group, but rather helping people understand that what we're trying to do is say, here's a fuller understanding and explanation of who you are. And the other reason that I think this is important to continue to do is that when you look at the challenge of race or gender, what you're also doing is something that I think is crucially important, and that is helping students, basically helping parents, embrace ambiguity. Far too often, what we do is give people simple answers to complex questions, or people rush to simple answers to complex questions. I think exploring questions of gender, exploring questions of race, exploring questions of fairness are really at the heart of helping people understand that these are complex issues, that there's a lot of nuance, there's shades of gray, and that ultimately, I've always argued that a country is always better when it looks at itself and then says, how do we continue to live up to the stated ideals of this nation? Because I think one of the great strengths of the United States are its ideals, that it's an aspiration. And you can't be aspirational if you start saying, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that, you can't study this. So for me, it is really about taking the opportunity to find creative ways, but that allows us to say, this is not about pitting people against each other. This is not about pointing guilt. This is about understanding. This is about looking at how a country has improved itself when people cross racial and gender lines, when people take risks, because what they're doing is not saying they don't like America. What they're saying is, we love the ideal of what America can be, and we want to help our nation be the best it can be.
Thank you. Juliana, what are your thoughts, reactions to that same question or what you heard Secretary Bunch say?
One of the most powerful things that we can teach children and teachers learn to do alongside their children is own our mistakes and not be afraid of making mistakes. And those mistakes leading to more learning. That is a lesson that my preschool students love because it allows us to be our freest selves. When folks say we can't teach anything that provides discomfort, I ask myself, well, who's already in discomfort in learning the way we're learning right now, with a marginalized view of history, with an exclusive view of history? We know better, so we're charged to do better. I believe that's a Maya Angelou quote. When you know better, you do better. And so we have to know better. And my heart goes out to my colleagues across this country. In Nevada, we were so lucky that preemptively we passed a law that actually went the opposite direction, that said, I think by 2022, all textbooks have to be affirming of the populations they teach. So we have to have full and complete and inclusive history, a humanizing, and it's not just history, but a humanizing content, pre-K to grade in all content areas, because that's the only way that we're going to provide the most comfort to everybody. Teachers are experts at being able to guide children through discomfort. So if children are having a hard time and their families are having a hard time, that just shows us where as a country we need more dialogue. That shows us where more stories need to be listened to. Sometimes I wonder if folks are afraid of this more inclusive history, a more reflective history, more just history, if because they don't know how to humanize somebody who's different than them. So I think that teachers are charged with this. And again, my heart goes to my colleagues, because sometimes as a teacher in a classroom, if your governor or your district imposes this kind of policy, you're charged to put up resistance to it, but at what cost to teachers? So I admire the teachers who are doing that work. And I just remind them that the impact that they're having by standing up for these values, like Secretary Bunch says, these are values that are going to ultimately help our country heal and help us come closer together.
And I think you've said something so powerful, and that is, one of the things I've always tried to do as a historian and as a museum director is humanize the past. Because my notion has always been, if I can reduce it to human scale, then you're not grappling with, oh my God, slavery, or oh my God, the migration of people from Mexico to California. But what you're doing is saying, let me understand how that need to find a better place is something that I can understand regardless of who I am. And so I think part of the challenge is to really not allow the conversation to be about things at a macro level, but to reduce them to human scale, because then people will engage, they will care, and they will be made better.
I couldn't agree more. And what you said made me realize how much our language matters. Our language and the language we choose to use opens the door for conversations, opens the door for other people to feel respected, to feel peaceful in their learning, to feel seen in their learning, right? And so when we do it at this, micro level, then we're acknowledging that history isn't about superstars. I mean, it is, but it's also about all the folks behind those people and in a movement. I've been part of human rights movements in Arizona working to fight deportations. And you realize that every single person matters and nobody can be criminalized. And so these are the lessons we learn in our spaces and bring into other spaces. And it happens, just like you said, on a person by person level. So I really appreciate that vision of history.
It is absolutely a person by person level. And I love what you just said, Juliana, that, history is not about heroes. There are certainly miraculous leaders who have, helped to change the nation and change the world. But when you look at it and start to understand and study history and social science, what you really see is it's about individual action and individual collective action. And so I think that sense that we really can't do anything to help change, it's something that's going on outside of us, outside of our community, outside of my sphere of influence, it's just not accurate. Every single day, there are opportunities to disrupt and interrupt injustice and inequality. And part of being able to do that is being, kind of with your backpack on of tools. So there's a question that came in from the chat, which I'm gonna pose to you, but the question really relates to supports and what needs to be in place to do this difficult work. And so as you think about your journey and how you have been able to step into these spaces to be a strong leader and an advocate for interrupting or disrupting injustice, what are the supports and resources that you have leaned on? And what are the supports and resources that you think educators across the nation might need to do this work also?
Well,
Secretary Bunch.
I'll defer to Juliana because I'm taking notes, everything she says.
Juliana, do you want to start? What do you think are some of the supports and resources that you have leveraged to be able to do this work, and what might be valuable for educators?
I think hope and advocacy go hand in hand. There's a great metaphor that a lot of grassroots organizers use, and it's called the closed fist and the open fist. And I think that a lot of the way to power and keep ourselves powerful is really looking closely at our thought processes, our frameworks. How do we look at things? And so this closed hand, open hand is with the open hand, you greet other people, you do things that activate the arts and creativity and togetherness. And then with the closed hand, you provide that resistance, that disruption, but you do both at the same time. And that's really a good way to describe my concept of joyous and just. In our classrooms, we can create the spaces that we want America to look like tomorrow. And that's what we're doing. Granted, I know that a lot of people are limited. A lot of educators right now are limited in that. And so I say that with a heavy heart, but teaching is heart work, right? HEART, it's hard work, and the word art is in there too. So we have to be creative and together in it. My vision for education is a collective vision, that we teach our students as a collective unit, right? These are the things that feed and nourish my soul, making sure that I'm surrounded by teachers who not only support me, but also push back and expand how I think about things. I make sure I surround myself around literature and the art that sustains my humanity. It's not easy. It's not easy. Teachers are right now charged with quite a bit, keeping our students safe, staying within all these policies, and also teaching. And so I think that the public can do a lot by vocally supporting teachers.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. And so that's part of your joyous and just platform I'm taking. Is that part of how you're approaching? I really love that. So that's great. So one of the great things about being, in the space of museum and cultural institutions and research centers, and then educators in formal and informal spaces, is that you have an opportunity to see transformation in students. So I'm wondering if each of you could think about a time that you witnessed a student transformation. What was the experience and what happened? And how did you know that transformation was going on?
Well, in many ways, I've always felt that museums, um, historical societies need to recognize they're about the greater good, that they're not about simply teaching facts. They're about engaging people to make a country better. And so, what I've always been struck by is how do these institutions do that? How do they support education? But how do they make sure that they're the glue that helps to hold the nation together? That they're the reservoir that people can dip into for understanding, for tools to live their lives. And I've seen it over and over again where cultural institutions have played transformative roles. I think about I did a project in Chicago called Teen Chicago, where I took ninth and 10th graders from different parts of the city and said, give me 2 years of your life. The first year, I'm going to teach you how to do oral histories and go around the city and talk to people about what was it like to be a teenager in the 1930s, in the 1950s. And the students began to realize that the same issues they're grappling with, sexuality, autonomy, power, self-identifying your own identity was something that everybody did. And what was fascinating to me was the second year of that project, they built an exhibition working with scholars from around the country that was named the best exhibition in America in that year because it was really kids now saying, let me understand from my lens, let me understand the past. And what I love about that project were there were some kids, these were not the A students, these were not all from the schools that are considered the best. And that what I love is out of 9 out of 10 of all those students then went on to college. 9 out of 10 then graduated college.
Wow.
And about a third of them now work in cultural institutions. And so for me, it really was an opportunity to say, here was a group of students who basically looked me in the eye on the first day and said, we don't care about anything else but us. We're really just going to try to go through this because, as one student said, it might look good on my resume. But by the time this project over, they became the group that supported each other, but also learned that they could learn in different ways. And by sharing that with each other, they supported each other, and it also helped them on their own educational journey.
That just gave me goosebumps. I love that.
What's powerful
Yeah.
is that they still reach out to me.
Oh, that's even better.
It really is. I'm very proud of them.
Leanna, what about you? When have you witnessed a student transformation?
I'm so moved by Secretary Bunch's example, just because that's why I think that I do what I do. And I think I'm going to assume you do what you do, is for the folks who don't feel like they belong, making sure that it's undeniable that they know that they belong. That's a really powerful, because it reminds us of the power of stories, right? The story of who my students are, the story of who I am is so critical. And I think that might be part of the reason that I'm sitting here today in front of you as the National Teacher of the Year, is because I felt empowered by my story. And that's because of the lineage of other storytellers, right? And so I think we underestimate how important our stories are, until someone has a little bit of curiosity about our stories. And then we see ourselves reflected in that person. And I just think it's really beautiful. I tend to over romanticize things just because of the emotion that goes with that. But I think our stories are so powerful. So yes, they hold romantic power in terms of moving our emotions and our motivations, but they also help us realize who we are. One of my students that I saw the most transformation in, and this is a student whose family wants me to use his real name, wants me to tell his story. His name is Joseph. And he insisted that I called him the Comic Squad creator with a Mr. in front of it. So we did. Joseph is twice exceptional. He's intellectually gifted, and he's also neurologically diverse. He has autism. And when Joseph and I started working together in third grade, he had a really hard time staying in the classroom and regulating his emotions, connecting to himself and to peers. And that was my task. My task was to figure out, who are you? What is your story? What is it that you're really great at that we can leverage so that you can understand yourself from within and from the outside about how you can harness your own power? So we literally created hundreds and hundreds of comics over the course of 3 years. And this is his story being written down. And I wish I had some to show you. They're so beautiful. And when it was time for him, because I started with him in third grade, fourth grade came around, and then towards the end of fifth grade, his family, his team, and I decided, okay, you don't need me anymore. You don't need special education services anymore. Let's just do consultation. He wrote me a book. He drew me a book. And in that book, he drew himself as a third grader, as a fourth grader, and as a fifth grader. The pictures of him from third grade to fifth grade go literally from a stick figure in third grade to a fully realized human being with expression and patterns on his shirt. And then each picture, first one was about this far, him and I, and then we were about this one. And then the third one, we were like this. Our success and our ability to connect ourselves to our potential depends on people believing in us. and people seeing us for who we are. Mr. Comic Squad creator was just that, an artist waiting to be let out. And that was what leveraged him to see his value in our school community and to see how it was important. And we would all have the patience needed for him to self-realize. And he did. I still talk to his mom all the time. And it's just a beautiful friendship that I have with his mother at this point. And Joseph knows I'm his teacher for forever. So it's that lifelong commitment.
What I really love,
I'm sorry, go ahead,
no,
Monique.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say how powerful that story is, because the other side of that story is you're giving students the armor, the protection, the tools to grapple with the challenges they face, especially when something's critical. You know, I remember teachers telling me that as a black student, the best thing I could ever do would be someone who could get a skill like working in, in those days, a print shop, or actually sweeping the floor. Somebody once said to me, the best thing you can do is make sure you know how to take orders. And yet, because I had other teachers who then, built me up, gave me confidence, helped me see what was possible, I was able to sort of push off and use those negative moments as motivating factors for me moving forward. So I think the notion of providing an opportunity for students to believe in the possibilities that others don't see is really why I love education.
Yeah, for students to believe in the opportunities that others don't see. And that's often what you're helping a young person do, is to see their potential that they have no idea about. And I'm struck with this quote that has always stayed with me. I'm sorry, I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's that a student may forget what you teach them, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so much of being able to support the productive learning for students is about that social emotional connection, helping them feel that they're seen, providing an inclusive space for their voice and their experience and the intellect that they bring, but then also helping to see for them things that they don't yet see for themselves. And so that's what I really, really, really like about both of your stories. So we're getting,
And if I may, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, because I think that this is such an important thing to bring up in terms of teachers. Students know when teachers authentically see their promise, right?
yes.
Like Secretary Bunch said, those teachers, he knew how those teachers felt about him. Same way he knew when those teachers felt in an unaffirming way about him. Our students know, they may not have the language to communicate, but they know when we haven't addressed our own biases, when we haven't addressed our own historical complexities, to welcome students and their families into our classroom. And so I just wanted to make that a point, that we all are charged to do that work so that Dr. Bunch's experience never is repeated in a classroom. And I couldn't go without saying that, because it's a hard thing for our teachers and for everybody to understand, but I think it's something we can do together.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Well, I'm going to jump back into an audience question. And this question is, how can museums and cultural institutions and libraries best support families in learning as part of the education ecosystem? So maybe I'll throw that out for both of you. How can we support families as part of this learning ecosystem?
Well, I think the great strength of museums is that by their nature, they can support individuals and families because they're social entities, right? So the notion of people coming together as informal communities, even I've noticed even within families who suddenly come into a cultural institution and have conversations that they can't have, that they didn't have before. And so in a way, I think the challenge for cultural institutions is to be much more intentional in terms of what are we doing that is family driven? What are we doing that is in the schools? What are we doing that is working with teachers? What are we doing that is outside of that at the YMCA or other things? So that in essence, I think the challenge for museums is to not make little plans, to recognize that one, the opportunity to be transformative means that you've got to reach out in areas you traditionally don't do. But
Mm.
also, it really means that you have an opportunity to basically recognize that it's as hard to do something small as it is to do something grand. So let's do
Hmm.
the grand.
And I can say that is one of the great things about working on your team, Secretary Bunch, is that you help us remember that every single day, that you really do help us think big and to think about the impact that we're trying to see and how we do that in a participatory way, but really to do things in a way that is inclusive and big. So I really thank you for sharing that. Juliana, I know that community is one of your major pillars. So can you share a little bit of your thoughts about how you bring family and community into the education ecosystem?
Absolutely. I think that we need to get t-shirts printed that said, let's do something grand. I feel like that's a great Smithsonian t-shirt coming up soon.
I don't.
Mine is all about access. I think that entities like the Smithsonian are doing a really great job of making sure folks feel reflected and respected once they're in the spaces. For me, it's about access, right? So what's the process of cost? I know the Smithsonian's free, which is amazing, but museums across the country, I believe, should be free to families. Maybe it's a sliding scale. How do two families get tickets? I know that when I want to go to a museum and I'm traveling around the country, I'll go to the library, and the library usually has signups for different museums and things like that. Do families know about that? Can we drop off tickets at schools? Can we make schools a place where people pick up tickets so that they can go to the museum? Once they're in the museum, what are we doing for accessibility for folks who learn and think differently? Right? What kind of education are we putting for folks who don't learn and think differently, but maybe could do more to open up the space? I know I talk to a lot of families who just don't want to go out in public too often because maybe their child screams when they're frustrated, or maybe noise is hard for them, or, so do we have rest areas in museums where families can go and, get the sensory input that they need? Language, I was so happy to see, every day I see more and more multilingual communication in museums and libraries. Let's keep that going. Let's provide audio. So for me, it's just about accessibility, because I believe if we build the bridges, people will come. I just might make a tag here. Let's give teachers free buses. Free buses, free trans. I think that that's the hardest thing about us planning field trips. We need transportation.
Yeah.
So anybody out there with lots of extra money can donate money for teachers to send their kids on a good bus.
I really do like that. I mean, sometimes it's the simplest things that we forget about, like the transportation aspect. Like we create all these things and then forget that detail about how are we connecting people. Juliana, I also really liked what you said about accessibility, but also making sure that the spaces are welcoming. I joined the Smithsonian in June, and I have to say that I had some preconceived ideas about the Smithsonian being, for the elite, very sophisticated, maybe not a place that reflected me or the things that I cared about. And boy, was I wrong. When I had a chance to start to dig into all the wonderful things that the Smithsonian, all the units are doing, I saw myself reflected in so many different ways. And the fact that they're grappling with really contemporary challenging issues was so wonderful for me, and how I have chosen to merge my professional life and my passions. And so I think part of that also is thinking about how you are communicating and reaching audiences in a different way, because they might have some preconceived ideas about the space. If it's the formal education space, if it's the museum or library or cultural center, we have to think, I think, about our communication and messaging strategies. We're almost out of time. So I do want to make sure that we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share something that you might not have a chance to share. But I have a couple of quick questions, fun questions. Hopefully these aren't too hard. So first off, I'd love to know what you're reading right now. So what are you reading, and would you recommend it to others? So Juliana, you first. What are you reading right now?
I'm right now reading this collection of essays about the abolitionist movement, looking at mass incarceration. I know, super light reading. And it's called We Do This Till We Free Us. And it has been transformational. For me personally, I get a lot of my endurance and a lot of my framework from grassroots organizers, folks who are out there doing things because they are willing to give their lives for community, and they don't care what they have to do to make sure that people are safe, protected. And I feel that that is one of the things that in education we can look at, is how can we intentionally make sure that our spaces are not following patterns of criminalization and marginalization with our students. And so I know that it's an abstract connection, but that's where my brain is. But I also love to read books in Spanish. That's how I connect to my culture and my language, and I make sure that I don't lose my Spanish. I love nothing more than on a Saturday or Sunday morning to sit there with a cup of coffee and just dive into a book.
That sounds good. I love that. And I love that recommendation.
It's funny because the book I'm reading for fun is Don Quixote in Spanish. Because when I was a kid, my dad wanted me to believe that you could achieve the impossible. So the first book he ever gave me was Don Quixote. And so so people have argued that my whole career I've been just tilting at windmills, but it's okay. But like you, then I'm reading this amazing book that just came out, really published by the African American Museum, called Make Good the Promises, which is looking at Reconstruction and its legacy. How things like mass incarceration or racial violence or the mismemories of the Confederacy are all part of it. So, for me, I'm always trying to find that balance between something that will engage me, make me better, will make me continue to fight the good fight, and other things that'll make me believe in the possibilities that I can't even imagine yet.
I love both of those recommendations. Okay, so we're just about at time. I want to give you both an opportunity to share something that we might not have had a chance to touch on. I know we've covered a lot of ground, so there might not be anything, but Juliana, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you were hoping to share with the group today?
I just have to let you know, Secretary Bunch, my mom's favorite book is Don Quixote. And we
Oh my
read it
goodness.
as children. And it was actually one of the ways that helped us learn English, was because we've read it so many times in Spanish, we read it in English. So anyway, it's just how powerful books are. I think the thing that I want to leave everybody with is just my gratitude to teachers for the incredible work that they do, for the sustaining work that they do. We're building a better path to elevate our profession so that these professional challenges that we have that take us away from our children and their learning are no longer such a challenge. And so I'm just, again, thank you to the educators. Shout out to the State Teachers of the Year who are also participating today. You have some wonderful, terrific voices. And just thank you, Secretary Bunch and Dr. Chisholm, for this space to talk about the power of education. It's been a beautiful afternoon.
For me, it has been, my mother is still alive. She's 93, and she's still a teacher every day. And she said to me when I told her we were going to do this, she said, first of all, to congratulate you, Liana, because she knows what it's like to be the best you can be in your field. But she also reminded me to say that there is nothing more important than creating educational opportunities, ensuring the future generation has opportunities. And my mother's argument is that teachers do that better than anyone else. So get out of the way and let them teach.
Well, there it is. Get out of the way and let them teach. Thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom and insights, and thank you for being courageous leaders and spending time with us this afternoon. Well, we're at the end of our session, and we're going to end on a video. I want to make sure that you know about the National Youth Summit that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. And so thank you for your time. Please remember to complete the survey, and we're going to go out on the video about the upcoming Youth Summit. Thank you all.
The future of gender equity is bright. The future of gender equity will celebrate, not just tolerate, diversity. The future of gender equity will take into consideration the historic disenfranchisement and marginalization of communities. The future of gender equity will fight for real equity, not just equality. The future of gender equity will be global, recognizing, like Dr. King said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.